10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Certainly when you go through the launch day preparations, there's a lot of moments that kind of stand out to you.
When the engine's light, you know you are going, and you know you're going somewhere pretty fast. When the engine shut off, you go from 3 Gs to 0 Gs instantaneously, and things start floating. And I remember distinctly just thinking, what just happened?
Same thing happens when you get to space station. It's kind of a defining moment when you get the hatches back open by sharing this experience with SpaceX and creating another
affairs officer at the U.S. Embassy in Rome. And I'm so happy to be here tonight for this special edition of the U.S. Embassy in Rome series, From Home to Space. Tonight, we're watching the SpaceX Crew Dragon launch, and we'll watch it live. But also, we have lots of special things ahead. Our program tonight is in both English and Italian. Make sure you choose the YouTube channel or the link for your preferred language. The interpreters will be working all night to translate, so regardless of what we're speaking, you'll hear it in your preferred language. So thankful for this great technology, even though sometimes it can be challenging, but we're glad we can bring you virtual programs like this. We'll be showing you videos. We'll have some short presentations and a question and answer session with some very distinguished guests, American and Italian astronauts. And we're really happy to continue to collaborate with the Italian Space Agency and Francesco Rea, the agency's head of communications. But for right now, I would like to introduce the U.S. Embassy's Deputy Chief of Mission, Thomas Smitham, who'd like to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you very much, Marlene. I'll just be very brief because I'm excited to hear from our participants and guests tonight and watch with all of you the first manned crewed space launch from the U.S. soil in about 9 years. This is a part of the U.S. Embassy sponsored program called From Home to Space. And I think what it shows for me is how deep this relationship is with Italy. Since 1964, the U.S. and Italy have had a deep relationship for space-related issues. And you know, the NASA and the Italian Space Agency have cooperated on a number of exciting missions, including studying Jupiter, Mars, Saturn. Our agencies have also worked together to develop modules for the International Space Station. A couple of our guests can talk about that in depth. And many Italian space companies have played a vital role in completing these projects. Tonight is a really exciting time because it's the first launch of a crewed vessel that's developed by a private company in cooperation with NASA. So this is the first time this has ever happened, which I guess is why there's a fair degree of excitement about this and why it headlines all the newscasts right now. So let me just stop there. Thank our public affairs section at the U.S. Embassy for putting this together. Thank you very much to the special guests, very accomplished special guests who have joined us tonight. And let's hope for a great launch in a couple hours and a great program tonight. Thank you, Marlene. Thanks for everyone for being here.
Thank you so much, DCM Smith. And I know you're a space enthusiast like we all are. So thank you for coming out and being with us tonight. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Anna Fisher, a retired American astronaut who was the first mother in space. Later in our program, Dr. Fisher is going to tell us a little about her fascinating career at NASA, working on the Space Shuttle program, the International Space Station, and the Orion capsule being developed for NASA's future space launch system. So please say hello now to Dr. Fisher. Dr. Fisher, if you would just turn on your mic and then say hi.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here with all of you. Good afternoon and good evening to those of you elsewhere around the globe.
Thank you so much. We'll be hearing from Dr. Fisher a little bit later. Right now, I'd like to turn over the microphone to Francesco Rea dell'Agenzia Spaziale Italiana.
Grazie Marlene, grazie.
Marlene. Thank you. And I would like to thank you for your hospitality. I would like to thank the diplomatic mission to Italy, which together with us has promoted, devised and promoted this initiative. I would like to thank and welcome the Deputy Chief of Mission. I was lucky in my role as head of communication of the Italian Space Agency of witnessing many manned launches as of 1999. I also witnessed the launching of the Shuttle, apart from the Soyuz. The last launch I witnessed was in 2007, a few years before the mission by Roberto Vittori, who are not wrong. It was the one but last mission of Shuttle before the long absence of manned flights to space. Today, it's not only going back to manned flights or manned missions of physics, but it's a change of era. We are in a new season. A lot of things have changed over these 9 years. So, yeah, witnessing an important aspect of space. My youngest child is 20. She was born with the ISS orbiting on her head. She was born in September 1999. Over those months, the first 2 modules of the ISS were launched. For her and her generation, talking about space is kind of an ordinary thing. They have always experienced that the station has been orbiting for 20 years, has always been there. So it has always been part and parcel of their lives. Today, we are launching astronauts with a carrier, with a vessel which is considered and described as private, commercial. The idea of space is something which belongs to everybody. It's a change of an era. We were used that the airplane was something common for us, while our parents considered airplane pilots heroes, as we considered, and we still consider astronauts heroes. And tonight we have 2 very distinguished guests, but probably the astronaut of the future, the astronaut my daughter will refer to, will be a very talented man or woman, but it's going to be like a worker of space, like the airline pilot today. And it will be even more so when we're going to go to Mars. So tonight we're witnessing something which is not just simply the launch of a new craft like the SpaceX Dragon, but something more, I think. And I would like to close here my short welcoming remarks. And I'd like to mention the Italian guest, General Roberto Vittori, who is an astronaut from the European Space Agency. He was the first Italian to fly with 2 different shuttles, the Soyuz and the Shuttle. The most recent one was in 2011, before the Shuttle retired. I would like to give back the floor to Marlene Nice, and I would like to thank her once again for this initiative, and I hope you will have a nice continuation. One more thing. I think I have to give the floor to Roberto Vittori. Roberto, are you there? Thank you, Francesco. I'm there. You've gave a very nice explanation referring to the life of the ISS, the life of your daughter. Luckily, you did not mention the other important date which we have in common. Another important date is 1964, far away in time, when space in Italy started. And when I was born, and probably you were born too. We were born the same year, 1964. Just to say a couple of things. First of all, that time goes by very quickly, but also that progress is very fast. Before 1964, before Gagarin and Sputnik, nothing like that. Over a few years, things have been changing at an incredible pace. So, looking at the future for all of the young people listening to us, space and airspace are really radically changed, and it's a great opportunity. Anyway, thank you very much for hosting me here. It's a pleasure, and let's hope that the weather will allow that the warning tornado is moving away. Let's wait for this, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Roberto. Marlene, you have the floor now.
Okay, thanks so much. Thank you so much, General Vittori. Thank you, Dr. Fisher. Right now, we're going to go live to Cape Canaveral, and let's get a glimpse of the procedures, how they're managing. Hopefully, we'll see some good weather when we go there. So let's watch the video now. And I invite you, Dr. Fisher and General Vittori, if you'd like to say anything, explain to our viewers about what's going on there, please pop in and say something.
They should be completing the hatch leak check. That's you sort of pressurize that area between, there's two O-rings that are there, and we want to pressurize that area, see if it holds pressure. It's a very sensitive test, very high criteria for passing. And so once that leak check is shown to be okay, and that the capsule or that those O-rings are able to hold pressure, what the team will do is they'll go back into that area, into that access panel, and install what we call the SPEP, which is the side pressure equalization plug. Once that is plugged, you've really closed everything up, and when the crew splashes down, what they'll actually do is pull that plug to equalize pressure across the hatch so that you don't cause the hatch to buckle due to a pressure, or sorry, the hatch or the capsule, the weldment, any of the vehicle to buckle due to a pressure differential. So they should be adding that plug, and then they'll cover up that side hatch access panel with the TPS panel or thermal protection system panel, close it up, and that'll make sure it stays safe on ascent.
And now, obviously, we're looking at a view from the outside, on top of Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon.
Well, they certainly don't want to launch if there's a tornado in the vicinity, but the last I heard before I came onto the program was that they thought they had a good 40 or 50% chance of launching. My guess is right down to the last minute, as long as they think they're able to have a chance to get a clear shot. Weather often moves through very quickly, and so I've seen where a half hour before launch the weather was bad, and then all of a sudden it clears. So we'll just have to hope that the gods are favoring us today.
And in your experience, is a 50% chance good?
Well, it's better than a little less than that, but I think they have a reasonable shot. But again, this is a test flight, and it's the first flight with a crew, so they're gonna, I would imagine, be very conservative. Also because they want photography, and if there's a storm and there's a lot of clouds, then they won't be able to get the photography that they need for a test mission.
Well, one thing that I always heard in my time that I spent a lot of time in Florida, they always say down there, the Floridians say, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute. So hopefully this is the case tonight.
That is definitely true, and so hopefully this will work out. It would be really amazing and wonderful if they just go on the first attempt. But we do have 2 attempts coming up this weekend. If for some reason things don't go well, there's a launch opportunity available both Saturday and Sunday. So.
Mi sembra che ci sia un problema d'audio.
Is there an audio problem? Do we?
You know, in our crew notebooks, we would have names of people that were very impactful in making sure that we were perfect in our training. And
that looks like a view of Air Force One flying near Launch Pad 39A for a special guest to have a special view of the astronauts on the launch pad. President Trump on board, making his way to Kennedy Space Center to hopefully view a launch at 4:33 this afternoon. And there they are in view of the launch pad. So no doubt he's looking at the window, looking out the window at Bob and Doug on the pad. That's got to be an amazing sight to see from on board Air Force One. And we are at T-minus 1 hour, 46 minutes, 22 seconds and counting from launch. And guys, the last time we actually did a little bit of research when we found out that the president was coming. The last president to witness a launch from here at Kennedy Space Center was Bill Clinton. That was back in October 1998 for STS-95. So it's been a minute.
Okay, and we are about 56 seconds away from the, oh, no, we're not. We have an hour and 56 seconds away. Never mind. Instead, we are 1 hour and 45 minutes away from launch. And Tahira, you are there with the social teams. I bet you are seeing some excitement on all the things we just saw on the screen there.
Hey, Lauren, I mean, like you said, things are really ramping up on social media right now, especially seeing that hatch close. I hope the weather clears up. And also we'll be checking back again. But for now, we are up to
we're going to have a quick video about Dr. Anna Fisher and her experience, and then she will give her presentation. Now, anytime from the video through the presentation, you can write your questions in the chat in Italian or English, and when the presentation's over, we'll ask Dr. Fisher. So Dr. Fisher, the microphone is yours. Can't wait to see your presentation.
I'm very happy to be here with you all. Today is so important. So with that, if I could go ahead and I'll get started so we don't waste a lot of time. I wanted to be an astronaut ever since I was a young.
Excuse me, Dr. Fisher, just
Yes?
1 minute while we've run the video, and then we'll do your presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you.
Dr. Fisher, go ahead. The floor is now yours for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for interrupting there. I could not actually see the video, so I apologize for that. So with that, looking at the time, I'm going to go ahead and get started because I want to be sure that we have enough time to get to all the information we want to share with you today. I wanted to be an astronaut from when I was a very young girl. I was very much of a nerd. I loved science and math. When I was 12 years old, my family was stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and I listened to Al Shepard, who was the first American to launch into space in May of 1961. And at that moment, I decided I wanted to be an astronaut. But of course, it didn't seem like a very realistic goal at the time. I wound up going to high school in Los Angeles and then going to the University of California, Los Angeles, and started out in math, but wound up graduating with my bachelor's in chemistry. And then I decided, though, that although I loved math and science, I also wanted to work with people, and went to medical school and became a doctor in emergency medicine. But I hadn't totally lost my dream of wanting to be an astronaut, because in the back of my mind, I thought that even if I don't get to be a career astronaut, maybe someday I would be a doctor on a space station. So I was in the middle, or just finishing my medical training, when I found out quite by chance that NASA was suddenly looking for not only pilot astronauts and test pilot astronauts, but mission specialist astronauts as well. The application had been open for about a year, and I found out about a month before the deadline, and was very fortunate to get it in the day before the deadline, and found out I was interviewing about 6 weeks later. And then in January of 1970, I found out that I was in the first class of astronauts ever selected for the. Again, the space shuttle didn't fly until April of 1981. So it was a pretty big risk to leave an amazing career like being a doctor to come and work for NASA. But it was my dream, and I didn't think about it very much at all. We were the largest class NASA had ever selected. There were 35, 15 pilots and 20 mission specialists, and the first 6 women ever selected for the U.S. space program. 2 women had flown previously. Valentina Tereshkova, a cosmonaut, was the first, and Svetlana Stavinskaya, and then we were the next 6. We are based in Houston, which is where all the astronauts in the United States have to live and train, which is where I live right now and where I'm speaking to you from. That's the Johnson Space Center, where all of our simulators are located. When you're first selected as an astronaut, there's an introductory period where you're called an astronaut candidate. And then we get various jobs in the office. My first job was to work in the area of spacesuits. We didn't even have a spacesuit small enough to and here I am in one of the lunar suits that belonged to Pete Conrad. But it was a great way to start my career. When I was about 2 weeks from my daughter, Kristen, I found out I was assigned to my flight. At the time, I was working at the Kennedy Space Center, helping other crews as they were getting ready to launch, much as you saw today in the, and if you're watching the footage of getting ready for the SpaceX launch. Here I was helping Sally Ride as she was getting ready to launch on her flight. And then I was assigned to my flight about, as I said, 2 weeks before I delivered my daughter, Kristen. I delivered her on a Friday, and I was back at work in the office that Monday morning because I wanted everyone to know that for sure I was going to be there. So this is the patch that we designed. Because I was the first mother to fly in space, at our press conference, they took a lot of pictures with Kristen and I. This is one of my favorites. It was really interesting today watching the SpaceX crew that they got to actually see their spouses and their children up close to say goodbye. In the early days of the shuttle, that wasn't the way we did it. And I think that today that was a lot better. So we had a practice launch count. You see my crew as we were just finishing a practice count. You may have heard that in SpaceX they had a practice count the other day. We were going to launch 2 satellites, which you can see here in the shuttle payload bay. And here we are walking out through the same doors that Doug and Bob just walked through, and where all crews from Gemini on have walked through as they go on the launch pad. We launched on Space Shuttle Discovery in November of 1984. Back then, there were 4 of us on the flight deck, as you see here, in suits not unlike what they're wearing, although I will say that the suits for SpaceX are perhaps a little more stylish than one crew member on the flight deck. Here you can see the shuttle taking off. As you can see, there are 2 solid rocket boosters on either side. Solid rockets are what make the shuttle launch have a lot more vibration. I was listening to them talk earlier in the commentary, and they expect that on SpaceX, the ride will probably be a lot smoother than we had on the shuttle due to those solid rocket boosters. Once we got on orbit, and again, it takes about 8.5 minutes to go from 0 kilometers per hour to 26,500 kilometers per hour, which is orbital velocity. And once you get on orbit, it is just the most amazing could ever imagine. Here I am demonstrating space here because, of course, everything floats when you're weightless. I'm not going to talk a lot about my mission. I'll just show you brief photos from it because if you're interested, you can go and Google. Our flight was STS-51A. It was the 14th shuttle mission. But what was really neat was it was the first time anyone ever brought hardware back from space. And there were 2 huge satellites that were worth millions of dollars that were in the incorrect orbit because their rocket that was supposed to take them to higher orbit failed. And so they were in perfect condition, but were totally useless because they weren't in the right place. So here we are getting ready, and we did 2 spacewalks, very challenging mission. I was the robotic arm operator. Here you see the end of the tip of the robotic arm, and one of my crewmates is flying the manned maneuvering unit over to dock with the satellite. Here in this slide, I've maneuvered my crewmate Joe Allen on some foot restraints on the end of the to grab the satellite. And then the 2 satellites were put in the payload bay, and we were feeling extremely excited because no one had ever done this before. It was a really exciting mission to be a part of. While we were doing those spacewalks and all of that, my daughter, 14 months old, now today, a reporter for Fox News, and she was just on a few moments ago reporting on the launch today. So she's come a long way since those days. This is our crew taking a photo on orbit. We were an 8-day mission. We did our deorbit burn on the morning of the 9th day and landed at the Kennedy Space Center about 45 minutes after that deorbit burn. We were the 2nd shuttle to land at the Kennedy Space Center. We felt steady, even on a very short mission. You adapt to space very, very quickly. I was really amazed as how quickly the human body adapts to weightlessness. And coming back, it requires an equal time to adapt, depending on how long you've been there. And then very shortly after we landed, we flew back to Houston, and it was really an amazing moment to come back and see my daughter after being separated. Now I'd like to just share with you real briefly some of the amazing views that you see from orbit. This is a sunrise or a sunset, and you see a sunrise or a sunset every 45 minutes because it takes 90 minutes to go around the Earth. The aurora borealis, looking into the Mediterranean and the Middle East and one of the Sinai Peninsula. One of the things you'll hear all astronauts, cosmonauts, and taikonauts talk about is that from orbit, you do not see borders like you do on maps. And you do indeed start to feel more like you're part of this planet rather than whatever particular country you're from. You still love your national heritage, but you definitely feel more like you're from this planet. And one of the things I think is so wonderful about SpaceX is that as more and more people go into space and see this view, I'm hoping that more and more people will have that same feeling that we have, that privilege to see this amazing. view from space. Mount Everest, and the daytime views are really beautiful, but my favorite were the views at nighttime. This is Greece, Tokyo and Tokyo Harbor, the Nile Delta, and Africa truly is the dark continent, with the only lights at night being along the Nile River and along the coastline. The United States, this is Florida, lit up, like a Christmas tree, where you can see all the lights all the way up the east coast of the United States. This is Los Angeles, which, as I mentioned, is where I was from, and I can almost pinpoint my home looking down at this slide. And then this is the Kennedy Space Center, and you can see the pads 39A, where we launched from and where SpaceX is launching from today, and 39B, the vertical assembly building, and the 15,000-foot runway where we would land a few days after launch. And then this is a shot I really love of Europe with the cities labeled, so I don't have to remember each one of them. And then one of my favorite slides is this nighttime view of Italy, which I didn't put in specially for this presentation. I usually have this one in all my presentations because I think it's so beautiful. So with that, I just want to tell you a bit about what we're doing now. We have the International Space Station program. The first crew launched in October of 2000. So we're going on 20 years of continuous manned presence in space. I was chief of the space station branch at the very beginning as we were figuring out how we were going to operate this station, how we were going to build it. And it was almost as exciting as my time in space, because I really think this is one of the greatest achievements of mankind. And the SpaceX vehicle, the Dragon, is designed specifically to bring crews up to the International Space Station. And here you see a view of the space station when it was completed. An amazing structure. The shuttle stopped flying in July of 2011, which was the 135th flight of the space shuttle, an amazing program over 30 years. And but finally, it was retired. This is one of my favorite shots of the shuttle on pad 39A that you're going to be seeing shortly as we watch the SpaceX. It looks very different in the configuration for SpaceX. So ever since then, for the past 9 years, we've had to rely on our Russian partners to launch us on the Russian Soyuz out of Baikonur. So we are really excited that we've now developed in the United States the Commercial Crew Program. Initially, it was designed to bring cargo up to the International Space Station. These were the three contenders for that contract: the Boeing Starliner, the Sierra Nevada, and the SpaceX Dragon. These were unmanned to bring supplies up to the International Space Station. So when we got ready to pick contenders for the commercial crew vehicle, we down selected to the Boeing Starliner on the left and the SpaceX Dragon, which is what is launching today, on the right. Again, it took it's been over 9 years developing these two vehicles. And so here we are. We have announced the first two crews for each of those vehicles, the Boeing Starliner crews on the left, and the you see Doug and Bob in the middle there for the SpaceX Dragon launch. This is a launch of the Falcon SpaceX from the Kennedy Space Center for a cargo flight. And here you see the SpaceX Dragon over Doha, I believe it is, but it's a very similar configuration for the crewed vehicle. You see here the version 2 of the Dragon, which is what is launching today. We've had an unmanned launch of the Dragon last Demo-1, which was in March of last year, and now this is the first manned mission. Here you see the cockpit, the layout. It can carry up to 7 crew members, but today, being a test flight, there's only 2, the commander and the pilot. Here you see and Hurley, Doug, the commander in the foreground here. And here you see them again in their really snazzy spacesuits, a la Elon Musk and SpaceX, and out at the pad a few days ago before they're getting ready to launch. The flight readiness review occurred a few days ago, a very 2-day long meeting going over every aspect. And at the end of that meeting, it was decided that everything was go. And if the weather will cooperate, hopefully we will have a successful launch. So here is a beautiful shot of the Dragon capsule in pad 39A getting ready to launch. Just briefly to mention, the Boeing Starliner is also going to be launching crew members later this year. They had an unmanned test in December of last year, which had a very successful launch and landing. Had some with the International Space Station, but they understand those problems, are fixing them. They plan to have one more unmanned launch, and then this year will also be taking crews. So the SpaceX Dragon and the Boeing Starliner vehicles are designed specifically to go take crews to the International Space Station. This will be the first crew of the Boeing Starliner. Their suits look quite different than the ones we used on the shuttle, and the ones that is using. This is the view of what it will look like on the pad as the Atlas rocket that the Starliner is going to launch from. Another view of that. And this is a view of the Boeing Starliner as it was launching for its unmanned test in November. Finally, I want to end with what NASA is working on, which is the Orion vehicle, which is a vehicle that's designed not to go to the International Space Station, but to go beyond low Earth orbit. And this is what I was working on just prior to my retirement. I was working on the displays. All of these vehicles have one thing in common, and that is that they have an abort system, which makes them inherently a safer vehicle, because if anything happens with the abort motor, can pull the crew capsule away and then it parachutes safely to the land. We had a successful test of that abort motor. This is not something that went wrong. This is a planned test of that abort system for the Orion vehicle a short while ago, and that all went well, and hopefully the Orion will be launching its unmanned test sometime next year. So finally, I'd like to show you some mock-ups of all three of these vehicles. You can see on the left here, the SpaceX Dragon, on the right, the Boeing Starliner, and in the background on the right is the Orion capsule. They all look fairly similar, but they definitely have different functions. So where are we headed? President Trump announced that he would like to have us back on the moon by 2024. Vice President Pence announced that the next person to step on the moon will be a female crew member. And so I think this is a really exciting time for NASA and for the commercial crew program. But the ultimate goal of all of what we are doing with all these vehicles is to go to Mars, which is a very complicated, difficult thing to do, but we are on our way now with the successful launch today, hopefully. But just to give you an idea of just how hard it is to go to Mars, this is a picture taken from the Mars rover, and you can see that little dot there that says "You are here." That is Earth as pictured from a Mars rover. So it is a long ways, and we have to be well prepared. So we're using the space station and then ultimately a moon base to learn the techniques we will need so that we can go on to Mars. And I want to end with this slide, which is my favorite because my grandmother passed away in 2003 at the age of 105. She was born in 1898, and in her lifetime, I cannot believe what she saw. She started out in the horse and buggy days to the development of aviation, to seeing the first man step on the moon, to seeing her granddaughter launch in the shuttle. And with the way technology is changing, and you can see with the SpaceX technology that you're seeing now, how different it is. I cannot imagine what the future holds, and I think it's going to be very exciting. And I'm just so excited today to be here with you on this momentous day for SpaceX launch. And I wish Godspeed to SpaceX, Doug, And with that, I'll stop talking and take some questions.
Great, that was super. Thank you so much. It was so interesting, and you have so much experience. I wanted to ask you just a couple questions. One that came up was a little discussion about, do we need to go to the moon first and then to Mars, or do you think that we could get directly to Mars and not worry about the moon anymore?
Well, in my opinion, it is important. And again, this isn't NASA's opinion or anything like that, but I think you'll see from the programs that they probably do. But I think we need to go to the moon first, because there's a lot we need to learn. And we need to learn that when we're only 3 or 4 days from home. And as I showed in that slide, when we're still developing a propulsion system to go to Mars, but best case scenario, it would be a couple months, 3 months perhaps, and worst case 6 months or longer to get to Mars and to return. So I think we need to learn to live on another body while we're relatively close to home to give us the best chance of success. Could we perhaps go straight to Mars? Perhaps we could, and I know Elon Musk talks about that, but I think it would be far riskier than doing it in an incremental fashion. But that, again, is my personal opinion.
So I saw a lot of questions. People are really interested in you being the first mother in space. And a lot of questions were asked about, as a mother, how did you find time being an astronaut and spending time with your daughter? It's so demanding. And another question was, how did you feel being in space and leaving your daughter behind on Earth? I mean, it's not just like when I leave my daughter in my house to go to work. You were on another planet practically, in another area of the universe.
Well, those are all very good questions, and there's no really easy answers to any of that. As I said, I knew I always wanted to have a family. And in fact, I told NASA that when I was interviewed, and they picked me. So I think that's to their credit. I didn't know that it was going to come together quite that way, that I would have my daughter and be assigned to a flight and have a new baby all at the same time. But in a way, looking back on it, it was a little easier actually having an infant. I had a wonderful lady who helped me. My mom came and helped me. And, Kristen really didn't understand what was going on because she was so young. I was watching Doug and Bob say goodbye to their sons, and their sons are a little older. And I think they certainly have an appreciation for the risk. But it was definitely a challenging year, but I was doing the two things I do most. It was an incredible honor and privilege to be one of the first women selected in the U.S. program. And there was no way that I was ever going to allow myself to fail, because I was cognizant of all the women following after me, and I wanted to prove that we were just as tough and could do just as well as our male colleagues. And I remind everyone that all my male colleagues had children as well that they were leaving. It's interesting now that my daughter is a reporter for Fox News and just had her first daughter. She's struggling with all those exact same, and she called. She's being assigned to cover the election and has to travel a great deal. And I asked her, well, do you remember when I wasn't there? No, you were happy as long as you were being loved and cared for. Every spare moment that I wasn't working, I spent with you. And I think you had a really good role model of that you can be a good mom and you can have a successful, demanding career. And she said I've listened to some of her interviews. She says it never occurred to her because of the example I set that she couldn't do both. But she had to leave her daughter to go to Vietnam with President Trump a year or so ago. She said she really began to understand how hard it was, because leaving her to launch into space was probably the hardest thing I ever did. But I believe in space exploration, and I felt it was worth the risk.
That's great. And I'm just thinking, I wonder if General Vittori will get that question as well. about leaving his children behind? We moms often get that question, don't we? No matter what career you're in. I have a question. Sorry. I have a question from Giacomo Cesarin. He's asking for David, who's 11. How was your first space flight? How did it feel for you?
Well, I will answer that by telling you my first comment to my husband when I landed, when I saw him. He was also an astronaut, by the way, and I was selected first, so he hadn't flown yet. And to him, it was all worth it. It's worth all the work, all the effort. And, you know, it's a long path becoming an astronaut because you have a long education, then you have a fairly demanding career wherever you are because you need to have an advanced degree of some sort. So just getting my medical degree was a lot of work. And then it was a lot of work training to be an astronaut and going on the flight and juggling being a mom. But it was all worth it. It was everything I dreamed it would be. It was the most wonderful experience you could imagine. You know, not every single moment, just like when you go on a wonderful vacation, not every single moment was wonderful. I did have space adaptations in 2 days, which is motion sickness. But on the third day, I felt wonderful. And our flight was the first flight to ever something as complicated as we did. And it was just everything I had ever hoped it would be, and being an astronaut is everything I had hoped it would be. And even now, getting to watch my go into space, once you're a part of that, it never gets out of your blood. I must say that I'm jealous today. I wish I were at the Kennedy, or at least supporting the launch. But I would give anything to be in one of those seats that we saw that the SpaceX Dragon capsule has. So it was an amazing experience.
That's super. You know, I just wanted to mention that I see on the TV that they're still saying soon this historic U.S. space launch will happen. So they're still watching that tornado watch in Florida, and they're still checking the weather. I mean, they're still strapped in that space capsule, ready to go.
You know, it's a tough thing. Those are all tough calls because, you know, you have the whole team all ready to go, and so to scrub a launch is a big deal. But of course, you want to do everything as safe as possible all the time. But on a test flight, you want to be probably even extra careful. But hopefully, like you said earlier, the weather in Florida will open up the clouds and allow us to launch today, because that would be really awesome.
We're hoping. We have a few more questions here. Christian Ravelli asks, in the future, can anyone go to space? Because he'd like to see it one day.
Well, I think the future is here, actually, because once SpaceX has demonstrated its capability, you know, they have their own set of vehicles and offer opportunities for other people to go into space. We have Virgin Galactic, which is giving people the opportunity to, you don't get an orbital flight, you get a suborbital flight, but you at least get to get a view of the planet for a couple of minutes. Boeing is developing the Starliner, and I didn't mention Blue Origin is also developing a capsule to go into space. So I think kind of like the early days of aviation, where at first it's just people that are, you know, adventurous and so forth that want to go. And the early flights were very expensive and often, you know, risky. But I think as time goes by, the cost will go down. Right now, you can go into space. You can buy a seat on the Russian Soyuz. I think that has happened in the past. Unfortunately, you know, you're talking in the millions of dollars, so very few people have that. But I think the opportunity is already here. It's just making it more, bringing the cost down to where more people will have that opportunity. And as I said in my presentation, I am all for that. I think all of us are for that, hoping that the more people that get to see that amazing view and have that experience will all have that same feeling that we're all from this planet, and perhaps we'll to get along better and take better care of our planet.
Eduardo Mangani asks, what were you afraid of in space? Were you afraid of anything?
I wasn't really afraid I mean, the thing I was most worried about was the launch, ascent. That is where most of the risk is. For example, at the flight readiness review that I mentioned, the risk of losing the crew, LOC, loss of crew, on the SpaceX is 1 in 260, I believe. For the shuttle, it was 1 in 68. So, you know, that's never far from your mind as you're getting ready to go launch into space, that probability is always there. But once we got into orbit, I honestly was not. I would say that the thing that I was most worried about is failure, not any worry about any risk to our. Of course, the Columbia accident shuttle, which happened on entry in 2003. I think we had become a little bit complacent about entry. I know I had, and I was only on the 14th shuttle flight. So by that time, I felt that most of the risk was in ascent. And I think you have to realize that there is risk at every phase of flight. But I do still believe that the biggest risk is during launch and during the ascent phase. But as I did mention also, with the abort systems that all these capsules have, I think it gives you a much greater capability to, for example, the Soyuz had one abort on the pad. Both crew members lived. Just recently, about a year or so ago, maybe a little longer, they had an abort at about into the flight. Both crew members survived. And earlier in their program, they had a very late abort where the crew wound up almost to orbit and took them 3 days to find the crew. But again, they survived. So I think with the abort system, it's a lot safer. But on orbit, my biggest fear was not doing my job well, not really for my personal safety.
So here's an interesting question from someone who's called Cabby329. He says, Dr. Fisher, I would love to know how you prepared mentally for the isolation of your time in space.
You know, I'll have to honestly say that I did not think about that very much because, first of all, it was an 8-day mission and I had 4 other crewmates. So I honestly, you know, and our days were so busy. We had 16-hour days and those days were completely full. So isolation was not something I really thought about before my launch. I will say I remember looking out the window and feeling this strange, here you are, part of the world, but you're also apart from the world. And even though you had the air-to-ground loop that you could talk on, it was always very professional, work-related talk. I think the question of isolation is probably a little more an important question for the station. And in the space station where you're gone for 6 months or like Scott Kelly for a year, I think that is certainly something that you have to think about beforehand and get mentally prepared for. A very good book, if you want to read about that, is Scott Kelly's book, Endurance. He's very fortunate. He was on a short shuttle mission. He was on a 6-month space station tour, and then he did the 1-year tour. And he talks about how hard the 1 year was, and mostly because of what you said, because of the social isolation. And one other point about that was when I was a Capcom in Mission Control, I was listening to an in-flight press conference with 2 of my colleagues that were on the International Space Station. And they were asked that question about, how felt about all of that. And it was interesting because on the space station, they an IP phone, so they can call anyone on Earth wherever they want, anytime. They have several space-to-ground loops. They have a private conference once a week with their family. They have laptops and they have email. So they have all this connectivity that we did not have on the early days of the shuttle. And yet the comment one of my colleagues made that has always stuck in my head, he said that even with all that connectivity, you still had this sense of isolation, that you were apart from the world, not a part of the world, which I thought was interesting, because with all that ability to communicate, they really feel the isolation as much.
Okay, so Massimiliano wants to know, if I don't study physics, could I still go to space?
Right now, it's still pretty much a requirement, to have a career in a STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and math. It's still at a point where having that is advantageous. But I think, and pretty much still a requirement. I don't know that you have to study physics per se. You can pretty much study any area of science that you want. And there are some areas of science that require less than others. To be a crew member, you don't have to totally understand orbital mechanics. You have to have a grasp. But there are people that are specialists in that. So, but it's still a requirement, I think, in some sort of a STEM field. I personally think that requirement will eventually go away. I think there will be opportunities for other people to go in space. Certainly, it'll be wonderful someday to have artists and writers and all sorts of people go into space. But at the moment, because resources are so limited and it's so expensive, and inevitably we're going there to do a job. But I certainly know that my daughter would love to be the first broadcast journalist to go into space. So hopefully one of these days it's going to broaden. I'm sure it will. It's just a matter of exactly when that will happen.
That would be really interesting. So here's something. Now, along those lines of physics, Jules, who's 9 years old, asks, how much pressure is put on you during a launch? And I think you might need some physics to figure that out, right?
By pressure, are you talking physical pressure or are you talking mental pressure? If you're talking physical pressure, for the space shuttle, we throttled the engines to maintain no more than 3 Gs. And what that means is, let's say you weighed 50 kilograms here on the ground. For a very brief period, 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes towards the last 2 minutes of launch, you would weigh 150 kilograms. It really wasn't very. Otherwise, the atmosphere is very much the same on all these vehicles as it is here on the ground. Mental pressure is a little bit different. It's definitely a time frame where you really are paying attention. I was the flight engineer on my flight, and so it was my job to make sure I knew where we were in the profile if we were to lose 1 engine, 2 engines, and God forbid all 3 engines, because we had certain procedures that we were supposed to execute. So all I remember of ascent, to be honest, is watching airspeed, altitude, main engines, airspeed, altitude, main engines. I just wanted to make sure that we returned safely, and I wanted to do everything I could to help our commander make sure that he could safely execute one of our contingency abort procedures were it required. And so that's basically, I was so focused mentally on what I was going to do that I really didn't see a lot of ascent until we got on orbit.
Okay, so we have a little bit of interest in the cuisine in space. Surinder asked if there's special food you had to eat, and someone else asked, what kind of food did you prefer when you were in space?
Well, the first 2 basically ate nothing. I kind of mentioned that I had symptoms of space adaptation syndrome. And if you think throwing up on the ground is unpleasant, let me assure you that throwing up on orbit is not something you want to do. And I was bound and determined to not do that. So I never threw up, but I did feel, symptoms of seasickness that I'm sure many of you have felt, or motion sickness. So in order to avoid that, I didn't really eat anything for 2 days. I probably had a few M&Ms and some nuts or something like that, but that was it. So I woke up on the morning of the third day and I was feeling great and I was starving. And I had a hot dog. It was probably the best hot dog I ever had, but that's probably just because I was starving to death. But our food is kind of pretty much, and even now on space station, I'm not quite sure on X, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was that much. And of course, they're going to the space station. So the food is mostly freeze-dried. And so you add water. There's instructions how many ounces to add, and whether it's hot water or cold water, and whether you heat it. My favorite was beef stroganoff. It was actually really good. And since they've been on the International Space Station, one of the things the crew complain about is that, when you're for 6 months, for me, an 8-day mission, I could eat anything for 8 days. It really doesn't matter. But for 6 months, or like Scott Kelly for a year, the food just gets kind of bland no matter. So they try really hard, to give you food that is spicy and that appeals to you. But the thing everyone loves the most, I think, is when one of the supply ships come up, whether it's a Progress, the HTV, the Dragon, whatever. They always bring some fresh food up. And so you get fresh food for a little while, for as long as it lasts. So I think everyone really looks forward to that. But the food is pretty good. But, everybody comes back, wanting pizza, Mexican food, things like that when they come back, because no matter how hard, and we have wonderful that work, the food on orbit at the Kennedy Space Center and at all the space centers around the world. But no matter how hard you try, after a while, things just get kind of monotonous and you just want to get back home and have good old fashioned, whatever it is that is your favorite food.
Okay, and I see on TV right now that President Trump is touring the NASA Center ahead of the launch. So he's down there too. Hopefully that's a good sign that things will be happening. We had a couple of questions that were kind of related. So Lorenzo wants to know, when you returned to Earth, were you happy or sad? And Laura wants to know, so when you returned, what did you miss most about being in space?
When I returned, I was, the analogy for me is like when you go on an amazing vacation that was absolutely wonderful and you had a wonderful time and you're sad to leave, but you're also happy back home to your routine, your surroundings and your family and your friends. So it was a little both. I felt both happy to be back and also sad to leave this amazing environment that I was privileged to be in. Ideally, it would be, I think, fun to be up there a little bit longer. Of course, when I was flying, we didn't have space station missions and so forth. So I think if I were picking a time to be in space, I would probably pick somewhere on the order of like 2 to 3 months, something like that would be ideal, around the time where you have time to adjust and get really good at it and so forth. But I felt both a little happy and a little sad. Most when I was on orbit was my family and getting to take a shower or a bath. You don't get to have. When I got back to Earth, and what I missed then and what I still miss most now is, that amazing feeling of being weightless and looking at the Earth as you float by silently, and the camaraderie of your crewmates. it's a really intense bond that you form. It's almost like another family. And, nobody in the world knows exactly what you have gone through except for the two, as in the case today for SpaceX, the 5 of us, whatever size is, because that was something you shared with them. So I miss that, but mostly I miss the weightlessness and looking at the earth below. When I'm here, when I look up, I would love to go on SpaceX, and I wish I had a couple $1 million so I could just buy a seat to go up.
Okay, and Giacomo wants to know, how does it feel when you're in space and you see really how small the Earth is in respect to the whole universe?
Well, that is something I talk about in every talk that I give, because when you look at the Earth and you see that very thin line of the Earth's atmosphere, and then you look back over into space and you see blackness that goes on for as far as you could see, and stars, and it's just this endless black infinity, and then there's this beautiful planet. It really hits home that, and I don't think you just realize it when you're on the Earth and it seems so big. You don't realize just how small it really is in this infinite universe that we are a part of. And it really makes you want to, one, take care of this planet and each other, and two, to explore space and see and find out if there are other planets that we could live on. And, you know what happened to the dinosaurs, and we certainly hope nothing like that happens to humans, to our species. And so it really hits home why we want to do this, why we want to take these steps away from our planet. And yes, there probably isn't a viable place for us to live in our solar system. Perhaps Mars, would be a possibility, but really we need to, I think, to go beyond our solar system. And, these are just really the first baby steps for going beyond our solar system to find another planet that might be habitable. So, but yes, it really makes you realize just how we need to value this planet, value each other, and take care of it and each other.
I have a bit more technical question here. Roberto wants to know about the industrial cooperation between NASA and SpaceX. How do you see this evolving in the short term, and how will this involve non-US space companies?
Well, back when we were, I guess it's been an evolution, let's put it that way, because, in the early days of the space program, it was an entirely US effort. Then when we decided to build the space station, we realized that, just from a financial point of view, it was a good thing to spread the cost. And in fact, that is what led us initially into the partnership with the Russians, and then eventually with all partners. It took us a while to get comfortable. I mentioned, I was chief of the space station branch at the very beginning, and learning to work with all of our international partners, and learning different viewpoints and respecting different viewpoints, and coming to solutions that we were all happy with. That took a fair amount of effort. So learning to do that was one step. So then along, and again, it's a similar step where, again, financially, NASA really wanted to hand over, since we have already learned how to do spaceflight to low Earth orbit, which is where the space station is, to hand it over to the commercial sector so that NASA could focus on what NASA does best, which is the future and exploration and so forth. So that's what led us to doing a partnership with the commercial industry, and again, steps. And we said, okay, let's try it out with cargo first and let's see how that works. They did a wonderful job. SpaceX, quite honestly, I had my doubts about all that at the beginning. I really did. But I am very glad to be proven wrong. SpaceX and, of course, Boeing, I mean, Boeing's an aerospace company, have been wonderful partners. Very different, very different to work with Boeing that has a long history of being involved with the space industry. And, SpaceX, basically starting from ground zero. I've been very amazed at what SpaceX and Elon Musk has been able to do. How that's going to work out with international companies, I'm not really sure I know the answer to that, but I do know that there's a lot of interest. I've been doing, as part of this talk, this is like for the U.S. Embassy in Italy. I've been to many of the countries where we have embassies around the world for the U.S. State Department, and the interest in the space program is amazing, I find. And in particular, I'm remembering one company that I visited in New Zealand that has the capability to launch smaller satellites, and they're starting to want to partner with the United States. So I think that's definitely a possibility. The protection of one of the areas that was sort of difficult is proprietary information. It was a new thing for us at NASA to suddenly have to consider that different companies were building these different vehicles and they had certain proprietary information. In the NASA world, we're not used to that. We're used to sharing everything. So that took a little getting used to, but we were able to do that. So I think those are just hurdles that, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to eventually do business with other companies around the world.
Okay,
it's not really my area of expertise, but that's my opinion.
And last question. So these space tourists, as we're able to go into space, what advice would you give them to have a good experience in space?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is that going into space is not like going onto a commercial jet. You cannot just walk onto a space craft with no preparation, or I think you're going to have a horrible experience. You definitely want to be prepared. You see, as you watch Doug and Bob, go out to the launch pad, even though no one has ever launched on this vehicle before. We've had many unmanned launches. We've launched on other vehicles. There's just so much training so that when you do go out on that first day, even if it's the first vehicle or if it's your first time going into space, you almost feel like you've done it. So you definitely need training. I know that, for example, I gave a talk with one of the people who bought a spot on Virgin Galactic, and they have a training program. So you're going to have to be relatively physically fit. I don't think you have to be an Olympic athlete or anything like that, but you definitely have to be in good health and good physical conditioning. You're definitely going to have some training. You need to be prepared. As I mentioned, I knew within 30 seconds of getting weightless that I was going to be one of the ones that would have space adaptation syndrome. And if you've just spent, couple $100,000 or $1 million to go into space and you're only there for a short period of time, you may not really have a great time, because you might not be feeling great. So you just need to be prepared. And if you're prepared, then I think you can have a wonderful experience. But it's definitely not, at least at this point, the same as walking onto a commercial jet.
So I know you have to leave us because you're going to join some other astronauts watch the launch at this point with NASA, right?
Yes, I have. We have a watch party. Plus, my daughter, who's covering this, may have some questions that she wants to ask too before they launch.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Your presentation, your life stories. Thank you again so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you here virtually in Italy.
Well, thank you so much. It's my honor to be able to talk with you and share my experiences. And hopefully these virtual days will be over soon and talk in person. But in the meantime, Godspeed, SpaceX, Doug and Bob, and wish you a successful mission and a safe return.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Grazie. Bye-bye.
And now I'm going to turn it over to Francesco, who will take over the second part of our program.
Okay, thank you very much, Marlene. Thank you very much, Dr. Ann Fisher. I'm very glad to be here. Adesso passiamo alla parte italiana con Roberto Vittori.
Let's move on to the Italian part with Roberto Vittori. Right now, we see the logo of the Department of State on the screen. Roberto, are you there? Yes, I'm here. I'm here, Francesco, and we're quickly approaching 4:33 p.m. Okay, let's do something. I'm going to ask Marco, Fabio, and Stephen if they can show the live feed from the NASA TV channel so we can see what's going on and we can comment with Roberto. Let's see if that's possible. And in the meantime, I'll start by asking you a question, Roberto. You've probably seen it up to now. You were both on the shuttle and Soyuz. Obviously, the shuttle was a little more comfortable. The Soyuz is a bit tougher, a little tighter. So look at these astronauts on SpaceX, even their suits are different. You're seeing things that, the spacesuit is really nice, actually. It's very stylish, white. And even the Tesla that took them all the way to the rocket. So I think Musk is very careful about style. But before being a matter of style, the Crew Dragon, I don't know whether you can see the images on the screen. But then, yes, they're already on the screen. You can follow. Well, I can't see what the others are seeing, but the Crew Dragon is basically a capsule. So it's very similar to Soyuz, but the way to enter the capsule is very similar to the one of the shuttles. Soyuz has a sort of lift, an elevator, whereas for the shuttle there was a lateral structure with a horizontal bridge, which is the same system used for this capsule. Well, right now, I don't know whether you've had the opportunity to see this on a different device there. Withdrawing the arm, which is very different from the arm of the shuttle. It's more futuristic from the standpoint of design, but obviously it has the same functions. But it looks like when the arm is pulled back, that's a moment when the crew is on its own. And right now, shortly, there will be the refueling of Falcon 9, and this too is something different from the typical operations of both Soyuz and Shuttle, where the crew arrived on board when obviously the spacecraft was ready. Now, in the case of Falcon 9, the refueling of the rocket will start shortly with both astronauts inside. And what does that mean? With the shuttle, we were used to a pre and a post phase, and there was that huge liquid hydrogen tank that gave the initial boost. So the refueling procedure is similar to the one of Saturn, the old rocket launching system, or is it entirely new? No. Refueling is refueling. It's just when you do it, if you're doing it before getting the crew on board or afterwards, as in the case of today. Now, clearly, 9 years ago, exactly 9 years ago, when we stepped onto the shuttle, the tank was full of hydrogen and oxygen at cryogenic temperature. So instead, when Doug and Bob boarded the Crew Dragon today, the Falcon 9 was empty, and now they're beginning the phase. Now, these are very special moments, and it's important to think about what Bob and Doug are thinking right now whilst waiting for the countdown. So going back to when I was an astronaut, you don't think about these moments. You're just waiting because both the Crew Dragon and the Shuttle, and previously the Soyuz, the launch phase is so dynamic that really the crew isn't expected to do much, nor can it do much. From just a few minutes, you go from the Earth surface to 27,000 kilometers per hour. So it's such a fast transition that the crew on board, the commander and the chief operations, as Bob is called, can do very little. And then the similarities, differences between Soyuz, Shuttle, and Crew Dragon. Well, this is very interesting because we're very far from Saturn, which is something different. Yes, it's a 100-meter rocket, very complex, with inside payload, payload. So it's something very different. Crew Dragon, like Soyuz, like the Shuttle. Here we're talking about the International Space Station. Saturn V, we were just talking about lunar service. So something different, a different dimension. And furthermore, Elon Musk is not just twiddling his thumbs. We have Falcon 9 with the Crew Dragon by Elon Musk. But at the same time, right now, in these days, in these hours, Elon Musk and SpaceX are building the first prototypes of Starship. Starship is like Saturn V in terms of size and ambitions and capacity. The goal is the moon service. Crew Dragon with the Falcon 9 instead is like Soyuz and like the Shuttle. And it's headed to the International Space Station. So these are two rockets that are both powerful, but that belong to two different classes. Now, going back to Falcon 9, from the 9 Merlin.
Così, per dare un riferimento, la Soyuz è 50-55 metri, lo Shuttle, la tanica era alta circa un centinaio, poco meno, e invece il Falcon 9...
And while the Falcon 9 with the Crew Dragon is in an intermediate position between Shuttle and Soyuz. The other thing, which is extremely important, is the emergency system. Namely, what happens if something doesn't work? In this respect, the Crew Dragon has some safety features which are quite relevant as Soyuz, in case there is a failure. Crew Dragon can be extracted from the rocket and can be made safe. And this possibility was not on the Shuttle for the first 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes of the flight. There were no safety options. As we remember the challenge in 1984, when something happened at launch, there was no safety system for the crew. For Soyuz, it was there, and this is true for Crew Dragon as well. Crew Dragon is a capsule, it has its own rockets, and in a case of emergency, also on the launch pad, immediately after the detachment, the rocket from the Earth's surface, even the most sensitive, delicate moments. Crew Dragon with Dragon engines, Super Dragon, I think they're called, manages to bring the crew back safe. Let me understand something to ask a question which I was ready, and we still have 37 minutes to the launch. If we are in the state of filling in the tanks, means that the weather still allows the launch probability to be pretty good. Let me understand one thing. What's the difference between the Boeing Starliner? Basically, it's going to have the same concept. It's going to have a carrier with the same mechanism. Conceptual one, it's going to be different because it's manufactured by Boeing, but with these safety systems, it is built in that way. So the SpaceX have already the first stage which can be recovered, while I think this is not the case for Boeing, but this is going to confirm this. So when NASA submitted the request and invited the various private commercial companies to build the successful shuttle, at that time, SpaceX and Boeing were selected. They started together, they asked for different amounts. SpaceX and Elon Musk asked 2.7 billion. At that time, Boeing asked 4.2 billion, same type of service. The reason why the difference was such a difference was never clear, but regardless, that Starliner followed its own path as it was with SpaceX, but as Elon Musk and SpaceX described earlier, some of the fundamental tests before going to this launch phase, which SpaceX did successfully, tests which Boeing was still lagging behind. If you remember, not long ago was the first unmanned Starliner test. They had a problem, and they're going to repeat the flight because of the complexity of this type of operation. So repeating such a test means wasting many months. But as far as the rest is concerned, Starliner as a capsule is very similar to Crew Dragon as a capsule. 7 astronauts in each case, as it is like Tesla, and as we all know, Elon Musk. It is creativity in terms of style and habitability. Dragon is probably slightly more in the forefront than Starliner, which has a more classical and more uncomfortable configuration. Basically, they are going to perform a type of work. They're going to have the same profile and same type of destination, which is the ISS. And clearly, when the United States are going to have also the Starliner, they can move away from the connection and reliance on the use after 9 years. You know the SpaceX world very well.
You know, the world of commercial space activities, having worked for Italy as a representative of the embassy, not just to favor agreements for our country. What is the additional weapon, inverted commas, because Boeing has a historical experience in this sector. You know, Boeing was there when the US went to the moon. Well, it's just, you just have to look at what happened for the new spacecraft Starship. They built the first one and destroyed it, and then after 2 or 3 weeks they had a second one and then exploded, and after 4 weeks they had a third one and then failed. So they had 4 failures one after the other, and then they succeeded. It's a type of approach that is different. It's a type of risk that SpaceX accepts. If we remember when Falcon 9 started doing its first landing attempt, they exploded one after the other. And then, through trial and error, they understood how it was supposed to work. What makes a difference is this type of approach, on the one hand, the willingness to risk, and also ability to invest, because obviously it's clear that when Starship, which essentially is financed by SpaceX alone, when a test fails and a second one fails too, that requires investment, So it's a number of factors, but, they have a very aggressive approach. Studied intentionally, taking into account a high margin of failure at the beginning, and this, as was the case for the first failed landings of the Falcon 9. Yes. Well, as we were saying at the beginning, the fact that there's such a big investment up front, because obviously, we always had private companies, but here we have, it was just the agency, the space agency, and now we have a private companies who may sell their product even afterwards. So, but there's a question in this rush towards space. There's a new competitor who seems to be very aggressive, namely China. China's working a lot, both on the station side and the new capsule. It will launch an initial probe for Mars. We saw how it worked for the moon. Are they strong competitors? China is a different dimension, entirely different. The Chinese approach is a typical approach. Here we're waiting for the launch of a spacecraft that is built by a private company, and NASA is just a client. It's paying from now on in fulfilling this mission. NASA has obviously provided a significant contribution, but the commercial approach means that the owner of the spacecraft and the mission is the private company, and NASA is a client, in inverted commas. In China, there is no such approach. There are various private companies, more or less, but the culture is different. It's a different world. So the Chinese example and the American case of NASA and private companies is entirely different. Yes, of course. The efforts of the Chinese, the focus, their level of ambition is very high, and the results have been very positive. It's sufficient to think about the launchers. Right now, their launchers are comparable to Falcon 9, certainly, and almost to the heavy version. But above all, they're already thinking the Chinese launcher that will be the equivalent of Starship or Saturn V. So they were able to land on the dark side of the moon. They're planning Martian missions. All the Shenzhen program has shown that China, in a short period of time, from 2005 to the present day, has achieved major achievements in the field of human exploration in space. So even though the Chinese reference scenario is very different from the American one, where we have an agency and its responsibility and the initiatives and creativity of private companies, and that is something that doesn't exist in China. But in terms of presence and capability and results, China right now perhaps is, if we exclude American private companies, China is on the forefront. Okay. Now, we're waiting to get close to the launch, and the NASA TV channels showing us the two astronauts and the rocket on the launch pad. So I'd like to ask Stephen if we can show the video to just say who Roberto Vittori is from the standpoint of space. And so on the shuttle before and on Soyuz and here now on the Falcon, astronauts get on board hours and hours before the launch. What happens? Do you repeat in your mind all the procedures you need to fulfill? I mean, you're there many hours before. So what is the procedure, the mechanism that you use to get ready? You don't do anything. You just wait. You're just sitting there. You're there 4 hours before because obviously the transition of the crew to the capsule is a very delicate stage. There are all sorts of risks. So it's something that needs to be done well in advance, about 4 hours before. This applies to Soyuz and Shuttle. Now, I don't remember how long before they boarded Crew Dragon, more than 2 hours, and then you just have to wait. There's not much else you can do. All the controls, all the checkups. So, these are things that are done automated, and even the launch is automated. So the initial phase for the crew is basically a long wait, and there's a great anticipation for when the engines are turned on, and then this long wait transformed to something very dynamic. And when I obviously was on the space shuttle, I had the impression I was in a cartoon. I felt I was being pushed. My back was being pushed, very strongly pushed forward, as in cartoons. It's also very difficult to understand what is actually happening, what is going on. But actually, if you think about it, the natural way for a man to go into flight is an airplane, not a rocket. On board a rocket, you're being launched, like satellites are launched. So actually, the future, especially with regard to low orbits, will be through aircraft that will become a spacecraft, a pilot, and they called Doug commander and Bob operator. But actually, when the capsule is launched, they're not doing that much. When they get into space, then their tasks are very important. But even intuitively, you can understand that going from the surface of the Earth to 200 kilometers outside the atmosphere, 0 to 27,000 kilometers. It's so quick that it's very little that a human being could do. In the future, instead, what will happen, as Richard Branson, who is the founder of Virgin Galactic, is trying to do, and as in the past, the U.S. Air Force tried to do aircraft such. I mean, we're talking about the era of Saturn V. These are aircraft that reach space, but they behave as aircraft. So where's Doug and Bob on board the Crew Dragon until they reach space will not be touching anything. When we have a test pilot on board, With Spaceship 2, that's the opposite. It's entirely manual. There isn't even a computer, and it's the pilot who has to have the ability and the skill to bring the spacecraft into space and back on Earth. In the future, what will happen is that the rocket has played an important part, but will go beyond rockets because the risks associated with this kind of launch systems is too high, whereas an aircraft would be much safer. Well, surely there will be some diversification, and then we'll talk about this because this is extremely interesting. We started off with aircraft and then we went back to rockets. So a bit of both, actually. So maybe, I don't know if it's possible to show the video that we had prepared to sum up your space career in 2 minutes. And not in the airport. It would take it much more. I don't know whether that's possible, Stephen, to show the video. And in a few minutes.
I'm going to give you 10 minutes.
I mean, another 10 minutes past T0.
Oh,
1645 local. I think we're probably clear on all the rules, but not quite going to make it for this.
Okay. We're going to check back in with you in about 2 minutes, and then I'll call it up at about T-minus 17 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, there's some of them are starting to count down, but we still have one above 2,000. So if that gets below.
And that didn't sound great right there. That was the weather net going out, but we're still standing by for a final decision.
You notice that also the digital world and the web world has changed considerably. From the first images that we had in our archive and the most recent one, there's a completely different type of quality. Probably after COVID-19, it's even more implemented, which will allow us to and allows us to do all of this. Now, I don't see, I suppose, I don't see you guys yet there, but I see on YouTube, I just see Francesco Rea. We see the image on the square. Let's see what they're telling us. I'm told not to follow YouTube, then we need to talk. So maybe nobody was listening to me. Anyway. I need to understand whether I need to talk or not. Okay. I'm told I can talk. So we were here about YouTube has a delay. We're learning a lot about digital issues. I don't see you, Roberto, but I suppose you're there. Yes, I'm here. Fine. Now, there's a lot of smoke. What does it mean? It's the propellant. Both the shuttle and when the propellant is put on board and it's a very low cryogenic temperature, that's steam, that's vapor. In the case of the shuttle, one of the features of the shuttle design was that the main tank had hydrogen and oxygen at cryogenic temperatures, which created ice formations on the pipes, which were then the element which led to more incidents during the program history, and the other famous accident the other date which marked the shuttle program in 2003. On February 1st, 2003, which led to the famous statement by the then President George Bush in January 2004, where the end of the shuttle program was anticipated and a new era was started, which we're now about to start in 15 minutes. The new era, which was announced in 2004, I'm told that the flight has been cancelled. A few problems.
Allora, diciamo,
it says that the flight has been troubled for today. Maybe it's an excess caution. Weather didn't allow it. We know that the launch windows are tomorrow, and if I'm not mistaken, Monday. There should be like the 30th and the 31st. So this weekend. So I see NASA TV, I see the crew relaxing. So maybe yes, it is because of the weather. They did not want to risk. It's a very peculiar and very important event, so we need to use all of the necessary cautions. However, we can leave all of the many people have been following us, and they are a bit disappointed because basically, again, this was a mission of how many days, how long? It's a short mission, which was basically necessary to test the whole system. It would have been a long-lasting mission since Starliner is late. NASA is trying to optimize the time of astronauts getting on board of the space station and them there. The delay caused from the Starliner before NASA to buy another Soyuz flight, and this mission, which in the beginning was had been conceived for a short-term mission into a long-term mission. Doug and Bob, once there, will remain to support the space station crew, maybe 6 months or 3 months, we don't know yet, but they're trying to optimize everything to offset the delay of Boeing. I was thinking that it was supposed to last a shorter time, but I think that the launch has been rescheduled for Saturday, so 9:22 p.m. Italian time. So what's going to happen is Doug and Bob will unbuckle, will relax first of all, will take off their straps and then get off. It's not nice for them. It's like, it's true that they are professionals and they know this might happen, but you're sitting there. 13 minutes were about just 20 minutes before launching, so going back. So it's an important thing. I have to start back again, but this was the difference between Shuttle and Soyuz. Soyuz, I don't think has ever been a delay in the history of Soyuz. In the Shuttle, I do not know how many flights have been living on time. There are two different vehicles, and the Shuttle is a wonderful vehicle. I was extremely happy to fly in it because the Shuttle is a bit what I was describing before, is a hybrid between a plane and the spacecraft. The nice thing in the Shuttle is that the weather had to be good in Florida, but also in Africa and Europe. You might wonder what has to do the weather with weather in Africa or Europe. Since the Shuttle is an airplane, and there been the need for an emergency landing. You take off from Florida, the first opportunity of landing in Spain. Is it really connected to the speeds we were talking about before? So let's imagine that you are on the Shuttle, you take off over a few minutes, you get to 27,000 kilometers an hour. You have to land, the first opportunity to land is in Spain. That's why the Shuttle was so difficult to launch. It had to be, the weather had to be good, not only in Florida, but also in those countries which are identified as the alternates. And landing the Shuttle was kind of a glider. So the weather had to be, absolutely had to be, I wouldn't say perfect, but very close to perfection. This is also the reason why the Shuttle suffered many delays. Also because it was a vehicle which was a very interesting vehicle. And was this another occasion because the flight like the X-15 suborbital flight is having a certain type of development. The question to go to space with different objectives, apart from the fact that there's still a lot which needs to be done, as the launch the other day proved, but we can't comment. If you had ever flown, if you will ever happen to fly on a Soyuz, coming back, especially coming back after you try the Shuttle, it's day and night, it's like day and night. Soyuz, Scott Kelly, the American commander, when he came back to the Soyuz, apart from space, he made an analogy. It is as if you are in a barrel falls down from the Niagara Falls and it is on fire. And I agree, it's exactly the same thing. Soyuz is simple, effective, efficient, economical, and very strong, but not comfortable too. It's not a question of tourism. Even the professionals coming back on Earth with Soyuz after landing your plane, and you're happy, yes, you can walk. Landing with the shuttle is perfect. It's extremely soft. I still remember when we came back Earth at night in Florida, it was softer than landing with an airplane. But clearly, both have pros and cons. On the one hand, the Soyuz is strong, but it's very, very uncomfortable. It's like falling, while the shuttle is very, very pleasant. Coming back, if you figure out to do this, the shuttle, which we make it fragile. So the future should be a compromise between the design of the capsule and the design of an airplane. It's exactly that type of compromise which will be the basis for transportation. Matter of fact, it is very interesting. People are following us and many, and yeah, they're curious they are curious about what you told us when you're telling us a kind of disappointment you're not witnessing. There are many people who maybe for the first time are getting closer. Space is kind of changing the world. I was born in January 1964. We just have few months apart. From San Marco in 1964, a lot has changed also in the past 20 years when we met for the first time. Many things have changed. And now space is part of our lives. And I believe, and you know that better than because you follow that directly. And but this is going to be something which will be much closer to our children and grandchildren. You have to give your comment. I didn't understand if it was a question. It was not a question back, Mark, but it was a question. What's happening right now? I do not know whether people watch the screen. The tunnel has been extended. Thinking of unstrapping to go back to leave shuttle. I do not know whether they're going to remove propellant from the rocket. I do not know. Since the launch is on Saturday, so in 3 days, they will start back again. I do not know how long we have. We can still talk for 10 more minutes. We haven't watched the Crew Dragon launch. If I can share my screen, I'm going to show you some of the images of a launch a few years ago.
Sì, assolutamente. Tanto allora facciamo così, prova a fare le
let's try and share your screen. First of all, I would like to say Marlene, nice with our host. Be ready because we're going to bid goodbye to everybody. When was it? 20 years ago? 200 years ago. 200 years ago. You're still fit, you're still wear the suit. I like this picture very much because we have the blue of the suit, but on the back we have the 38, which is one of the airplanes which have marked the history of military aviation. The 38 seem to be brand new, but they are 50 or 60. They stand time, but it was 2:38. That's the train vehicle for NASA astronauts and still is 2:38. I do not know whether you remember that F-104. I do not know whether F-104 rings a bell, which marks the history of the airspace. Neil Armstrong, since the first astronauts were all somehow connected to that type of flight. Let's see whether I have some more pictures. So maybe you can help me with moving forward. What do I need to do to move on to the next picture? Oh, use it. Click on the hours. Yes, here we are. Here we're inside the shuttle, not for the launch, because otherwise we'd be wearing an orange suit. This is just to give those who are following us an idea of what the shuttle looked like inside. It looks a bit like an aircraft, many switches and normal seats. Here it is. We didn't see the launch of the Crew Dragon. This was our launch on 16th May 2011. And here again, it was a second attempt. We didn't make it on the first attempt. On the second attempt, there was a risk of bad weather. But at a certain point, whilst during the countdown, suddenly there was the clouds cleared and we were able to take off, taking advantage of the fact that the clouds are cleared. This is us again. And this is a pretty rare picture. There was an X-15 of the American Air Force that was patrolling to protect the airspace, and they took this picture, this incredible picture. And if you take a look at it, the clouds were the hole that formed there that allowed us to take off were, had disappeared. The clouds had gathered again. So, and here instead we're in. This is a few years earlier on the other side of the world. This is the Soyuz. This is the inside of the Soyuz, which is a capsule. And Crew Dragon 2 is a capsule. So the shuttle is an aircraft that becomes a spacecraft. Soyuz, like Crew Dragon, are capsules. They don't have wings, so it's easier to put them into orbit. They're more robust, but where they re-enter, but they don't land. They cannot be maneuvered. They can only land with pressure, and this makes the landing very tough. This is 2002. This was my first flight with Soyuz. This is when there was the ignition of the engines for the start of the first mission on board the station. This is the Soyuz, the equivalent of the Crew Dragon. The Soyuz isn't bad. Those are actually solar panels, those wings. But Elon Musk's Crew Dragon is really nice. The design is really great. Even though Soyuz isn't at all bad, even the shuttle is very nice. The International Space Station, here we're inside the space station. This was my second mission with Piccoli and John Phillips. The one between me and Sergei. Sergei today is one of the main deputies of Roscosmos. And this is Paolo and I when we met on 2011 on board the International Space Station. Special story, we were both selected together. We tried to compete one against the other for those who flew, the one who flew more and further up. And then we found ourselves together in 2011. He was on a long mission, I was on a short mission. This is a beautiful picture with the Italian flag on board the International Space Station. Looking outside the window of the space station, and you can see very nice, unusual things. A view of the Earth from space is amazing. Here at the center of our attention is that module, and you can see NASA. But if you take a closer look,
Francesco, you can see another acronym there too, besides NASA. Yes, they one of the Italian space agents. I remember how difficult it was to make it and put it on. It has to be tested, validated. That's our joy. Yes, that logo has to be a little more visible. Yes, we are working on that for the next modules, the lunar ones. Okay. This instead is another picture where obviously we see Italy upside down. You can see the Alps. We have our PMM module on the bottom left and the tail of the shuttle, the Endeavour, the last flight of the Endeavour. And when it re-entered, unfortunately, because really it's a wonderful spacecraft that was could offer a lot more still, in my view. It was put in a museum in Los Angeles. Here it's me inside, microgravity. To take this perfect picture, we made several attempts. No, I'm joking. After a while, you get used to microgravity and coordinating yourself in that those conditions becomes natural. In the beginning, it's a bit difficult. When you get into space and you're in microgravity, it's like being like a kid. You have to learn things again. You have to learn how to your muscles, how to move, how to orient yourself. So this is a very interesting aspect. After launch, after this these dynamic 8 minutes, then going into microgravity, and until you're able to understand what to do, it can be a little difficult, but then afterwards, you can. The interesting thing is that you can work on the 4 dimensions. You can tap all the available spaces, and this makes relatively small modules capable of doing many things because you're exploiting the whole volume. This is not a fake picture, it's a real picture. It's a picture taken with an extremely high sensitive camera. And if you look at the shuttle, you see all these stars and the colors of the planet Earth derived from the fact that to capture, this was taken at night, to capture the stars, you need to keep a given exposure for several seconds, a minute or more. And since the Earth rotates or revolves, or rather, you're at 27,000 kilometers per hour, the effect of the lights on Earth derives from this speed. Well, this was a quick mission. We saw the launch and we saw some pictures of the station and we're ready to re-enter. And in this picture, I was wearing the orange suit. Elon Musk has those white suits, those white space suits that are very beautiful. But even our previous suits used on the shuttle are very nice. These are suits that protect the astronauts. This is a picture instead. We're ready in the re-entry phase. I'm the one taking the picture from the middle. On the left, Mark Kelly, the commander, and then we have on the right, Gregory Johnson. And if you look carefully, Francesco, you can see the screen and outside. You don't see blue. You don't see the blue of the sky, but you see yellow, a sort of pinkish yellow. Why? Why do you see this pinkish yellow? I don't know. I can't even distinguish the color. It's as much as while you were in there. Well, let's take a look at it with Soyuz. Here, we're on board the Soyuz. We're re-entering with the Soyuz, and from the window we see the blue sky, which at a certain point becomes like this. So when you're re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, in the upper part of the atmosphere, what happens is that the atmosphere slows down the rocket, so you're orbiting around the Earth and you're 20,000 kilometers per hour, 8,000 kilometers you would never be able to land. So you need to slow down. And to slow down, what makes you slow down is the interaction with the atmosphere. The air slows you down, but this braking action is so strong that the capsule burns, basically, like the shuttle did. So actually, in the case of the shuttle, there was these famous tiles that protected it. In the case of Soyuz, there is a plate, but many pieces of Soyuz burn because the Soyuz cannot be used. This stage of reentry is the very strong phase that we were talking about earlier, where in the story, in the NASA analogy made by Scott Kelly, the American commander, beating a barrel, with the barrel falling in flames. And this shows it even more. You can really see the flames. And all this converges when you get to about 10,000 feet, about 3 kilometers. The speed, thanks to the brake and action of the air, has reached about 200 centimeters per second. So speed is further reduced, and then the parachute brings you softly, in inverted commas, onto the land, but it's softly. But if you look at the smoke on the picture, you can see that it isn't that landing wasn't such a soft landing. They call it miat kapasati, which means a soft landing, but it isn't that soft after all. And this is after landing. This is a selfie after landing. Okay, great, Roberto. Now I'm going to ask Marlene if she can join us. Yes, I'm here, Marlene. So, we need to wrap up, we need to close. Thank you, Roberto, for being with us and for commenting with us this non-launch, but at least you showed us wonderful images of your mission. Your final comment, Marlene.
I'm really excited to get to live through all of you through this. I was also raised in the 60s in the space era and grew up with it, but I didn't choose it as my career, but boy, do I love hearing about it from all of you. So thank you so much for joining us. General Vittori, we so appreciate the time you took again to join us. You're like one of our returning stars of this program. And I want to thank Dr. Anna Fisher for taking the time from Houston to join us before she went off to join with other NASA colleagues. You know, we can't help that the launch didn't happen, scrub as they call it. But I said earlier, you know, if you don't like the weather in Florida, wait a minute. But I guess these things are a little more technical than just waiting another minute for the weather. So hopefully everybody will tune in at 3:30 Washington time, 3:30 Florida time, which is 9:30 p.m. here in Italy, and maybe see the launch. I know I'll try to see it. Anyway, I also wanted to thank our Deputy Chief of Mission for joining us tonight, Thomas Smitham, and giving us some great remarks. I know he really likes the space program and exploration too. And I want to thank our interpreters, Cheryl Di Lorenzo and Bruna Camarano. And please don't forget our fabulous From Home to Space crew at the U.S. Embassy. And thank you also, Francesco Rea from the Italian Space Agency, for always working with us on this great series, From Home to Space. I know we're going to continue. We have some other Italian and American experts lined up. And please watch for the announcement coming out for the next time and place and day for From Home to Space. Thank you all for watching, and especially our return viewers. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Are clocking right along per the 40-minute timeline. Everything looks good, and we'll wait to hear that we're clear, and then when we get the call for Bob and Doug to go ahead and disarm launch escape system, and the crew access arm will come back out, center itself around the Dragon hatch, and then the ingress team will